Nestled on a mountain, seemingly miles away from factions and covenants, was a church. A simple cathedral far from the eyes of the warring generals and warlords. This cathedral, near the borders of Ashfeld and Valkenheim, was run by a convent of nuns and sisters of the faithful. They were pious women, praying fervently for the salvation of Heathmoor and an end to the suffering of its children. They were a sanctuary to the refugees, injured, and orphaned, regardless of faction or origin. The sisters did not deny any who sought God's grace, and through their compassion the cathedral flourished. The Mother Superior of this convent was a kindly young woman named Deborah. Very young to be a Mother Superior, it was through her leadership and compassion that the convent grew and was successful. She was a wise woman, kind and hopeful. None could ever have imagined the convent without her. All of her sisters came to love her like a mother, so she was more than just a Mother Superior to many. She was a guide and a teacher. The first thing she taught most of her flock was to remember the sacred psalm, to rescue the weak and the needy. There could be no greater calling for anyone who called themselves one of the faithful. And through this lesson did she encourage her sisters to welcome all who were willing to receive hope, help, enlightenment, and mercy. Regardless of faction or origin, the Mother Superior cared for any who came to her. One fateful morning, a small legion of knights, calling itself the Legion of Samus, led by a lawbringer of the same name, arrived at the convent. Mother Superior Deborah went out to meet the weary knights, and they gave her a respectful bow. They explained that their legion had been given a directive. A small clan of Vikings had been making hit-and-run tactics in different outposts near this very mountain, and they were to find out where the Vikings were and hit them first. They simply requested they be allowed to rest for the day at the church, at least for the night. And Deborah allowed it, welcoming the legion gratefully into their hall. The nuns tended to their hunger, thirst, and fatigue. The knights were well cared for and looked after. But as the day turned to evening, the legion became loud and wild. They had with them several tankards of alcohol and began drinking it in copious amounts. The sisters did their best to avoid them, but within an hour of their drunken revelry, the knights discovered the chambers housing refugees from Valkenheim, the Mire, and the Woolin camps. The knights began to grow hostile. Samus announced that the church had been tainted by the heathens and foes of Ashfeld, and it must be cleansed. The nuns screamed in protest and pleaded, running to the defense of the refugees and injured peoples. But it was no use. The Legion of Samus slaughtered the horrified refugees. Injured soldiers, too weak to fight back, were gutted. Even children were not spared. The sisters were horror-struck, wailing in lamentation and disbelief. But their horror was not over. The knights were too inebriated to even comprehend the tears of the sisters. One said of them that the sisters of the faithful were weeping, for they had clearly been unaware of the taint amongst them. But it was no matter. The sisters would be cleansed. Many of the sisters were raped, abused. One, too young to handle their acts, died in the process. Mother Superior Deborah could not stomach this barbarism, this insanity. She tried to fight them off. To no use. She swore she would report this to the Iron Legion, to Chimera, to the Lord Warden, to anyone who would punish these villains for their crimes. Legion Master Samus only glared at her, drunken and angry, high on his own power. Deborah did not flinch, but held her ground as tears rolled down her face. "You will face justice," she cried, "be it from Ashfeld or from the Lord. You will face justice." They ignored her and threw her into the bell tower, where they locked her inside, barring the door closed so she could not interfere any further. Despite her pleas for mercy, her prayers for deliverance, Deborah could not stop the insanity that was taking place on the other side of the door. It did not end until well into the night, when the voices and screaming stopped. From within her prison, Deborah prayed, pleaded for salvation. All her life she had been taught that strife and misery were a certainty, but it was the purpose of the faithful to continue to believe in the reality that God would provide an answer. Why had this happened to them? Had it been wrong for them to take in refugees? No, that couldn't be the reason. Perhaps they had been wrong to give sanctuary to the Legion of Samus? No, that was not it either. They had not done anything wrong by showing compassion and hospitality. Of this she was certain. So then why were they being persecuted in this manner? Could it be the Lord's doing? Was this divine punishment for something? For days and nights she wept, prayed and sought answers, pleaded for some kind of deliverance. But days turned to weeks, and she was barely fed. Barely any water to drink, but the morning dew that dripped through the roof of the tower that she could drink carefully if she conserved it. Her hope dwindled by the day, though her faith did not. If I am to die, she thought, I will die with my conscience clear and my soul intact. And with one final prayer for forgiveness and acceptance, she lay down her head to sleep, believing she would next wake in the arms of the Lord. But when she awoke, it was to the smell of smoke and the warmth of fire. The Vikings that the Legion of Samus claimed to be hunting had arrived in the night, and the Legion of Samus, cowards that they were, had fled from the church before they could be cornered. And the Vikings plundered, stole, pillaged the holy house, and now that they had what they wanted, they were burning the building to the ground. Deborah, coughing, tired, starving to near exhaustion, she ran to the window, desperately trying to open it to get out. However, opening the window let in a tremendous amount of air, fueling the fires around her, sending tongues of flame leaping at her in the opening she'd created. With a final desperate fight for her life, Deborah threw herself from the window and fell to the earth below, collapsing, moaning, feeling broken bones, and whimpering from the pain. Yet she was alive. But hope did not return. Surely the Vikings would find her. She heard them shouting, yells of anger and surprise. It would be over soon. They'd be upon her in moments. She turned her eyes away and dared to pray one more time for a miracle, for salvation. "Are you alive, Mother?" Deborah felt a hand on her back. Her tattered and torn robes of the cloth felt hot on her skin as she looked up to see a man in a cowl of his own, a steel crown around his head and a shield at his side. His was a face that she had only seen once or twice but never met before. "Vortigern," she whispered. "The Vikings are dead, Mother. I have dealt with them," he explained. Deborah looked from where she lay and saw the bodies of beaten, bloody, and even decapitated Vikings. Slaughtered like animals, she slowly rose to her knees and turned back to the burning, destroyed remains of her church. There was no point wondering if any of her sisters or the Samus Legion were alive inside. None could have survived that inferno. "There was a Night Legion here. The Legion of Samus," she whispered. "They were the reason I came here," Vortigern explained. "I've been searching for them. They are wanted for crimes against Ashfeld and her laws. I'm sorry I was not here sooner." Mother Superior removed the white dress from her head, letting her long brown hair hang free, and for the first time in a very long time, her eyes beheld the scorched earth, the snowy, gray sky, and the bitter cold of the mountain air that contrasted the burns on her face, hands, and body. "I prayed so fervently for deliverance, for a miracle. And then you came to me," Deborah whispered. "The Lord has provided me salvation. My faith has rewarded me." "And what of your sisters?" Vortigern asked. Deborah felt new tears building in her eyes as she remembered the horrors that had been forced to face, the rape, the brutality, and the murder. "They are in the arms of God now. They are at peace. But my work is not over, Lord Vortigern." "Will you rebuild?" he asked. "No," she answered firmly and coldly, with a voice that was now alien even to her. "The Lord has offered me salvation and clarity. My mission, my calling, is to protect the innocents of Heathmore. I was a shepherd to the weary and the frightened flock, but I am a shepherd without crook. In my desire to save, I forgot that there are times I must be prepared to fight." "You will fight?" Vortigern asked, intrigued. Mother Superior Deborah nodded. "Rescue the weak and the needy," she whispered. "From the Psalms, it was the defining creed of my church. But there was a second part to the verse. Rescue the weak and the needy, and deliver them from the hand of the wicked." She turned her gaze to Vortigern, and her eyes were not of death, but burning fire. A fierce desire, a purpose refound and forged in fire. "I would go with you, Lord Vortigern. Teach me." With Vortigern's blessing, Deborah was accepted into the ranks of the Black Priors. Many of the warriors were devout like Deborah, but none had her conviction and aspirations. She was a focused, fiercely determined acolyte, and for 3 years she trained. She learned the way of shield and sword, the methods of war, and the use of savagery in combat. She did not shrink back from her lessons. She did not become squeamish as some new recruits did. In fact, she relished every new opportunity, and on the 4th year of her time with the Priors, she was recognized as a full soldier, a true Prior. Deborah embraced black steel armament, a helmet to hide her face, and a cowl to represent her mourning for her lost sisters. And then, at long last, Vortigern provided her with her very first task. Samus had been located. His legion had gone into hiding in the mire. Now, Black Priors do not go out as a large legion force like most knightly orders. Often they are sent alone or in pairs to deal with specific threats or problems, sometimes working alongside a legion. Deborah was sent to deal with Samus. Finding him was easy. He and his dwindling legion were in a samurai village where they had been exploiting the people for days. The peasants had appealed for samurai aid, but there were battles elsewhere that had been attended to. They had no time to rescue a small village. And as Deborah approached the town, a few of the legion rushed there to finish her off, to stop her from reaching Samus. She cut them down without hesitation and without reservation. None could see the face of the Prior as Samus walked out to see the visiting warrior. One Prior did not frighten him. He simply sneered at her, demanding she leave at once. "This village belongs to Ashfeld, and I am its protector," he explained. "But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. He is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer." Deborah quoted the scripture as she approached Samus. Her voice was familiar, but Samus could not place her, for her face was hidden by the helmet. "I offer you one chance, Samus. Repent of your wickedness. Turn your back on sin and return to the light." Samus laughed at the offer. Scoffing as he took up his poleaxe, spitting at her, he attacked, and the two engaged in a vicious duel that set teeth on edge and caused the very air to fill with malice. But Samus was caught off guard by the ferociousness of the Prior. Despite her fair voice, despite her smaller stature, she fought with the strength of 3 men. Finding an opening, she smashed her shield into his helmet and then kicked him to the ground. She grabbed his helmet and threw it off, exposing his sweaty, exhausted face. And she removed her own helm. And as Samus beheld the face of the Mother Superior, his face turned pale, his mouth opened in horror and shock. She had changed so much since he'd last seen her. Though her face was the same, her brown hair still obvious, and her deep, emerald green eyes were still the same as he remembered. They burned now. The same kind, warm innocence of them before was now lost to a deep inferno of righteous fury. And the expression that she wore was one of rage, one of anger, but also one of divine purpose, one that sent chills down his spine. "Deborah, Mother Superior," he cried. "I am an instrument of divine wrath," she answered. "I am a protector of the faithful and defender of the weak. Your transgressions against my church and against my sisters was only a mere taste of the atrocities you have committed, and I find you guilty." She raised her sword above her head, sending Samus into a frenzy, desperate to get up and flee. And I have seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree. And he soon passed away and was no more. And though he was searched for, he could not be found. She then brought the sword down, and the legion of Samus was destroyed with a single sword stroke. Legends persist to this day of a prior, adorned in ashen and black robes, with a helmet to hide her face. The wicked flee at her coming, and the villainous who dare to fight her are met by a verse of wrath and a sword of vengeance. But children who approach her are met with a soft hand and a kind word. She has a habit of remaining in a village or town for some time after her business is concluded, speaking to the people, sharing her testimony and speaking of hope, salvation, and mercy. The sword that strikes down evil also offers a gentle touch. For she is not like other priors. She is not a warrior who seeks blood for the sake of blood. She is a judge upon the land of Heathmore, a guiding shepherdess who has found her crook, an angel of mercy, but also of damnation. She is known to some as the Mother Superior, Deborah, but to most of Heathmore, she is known as the Heaven's Angel of Judgment.